Testing, testing. Okay. I want to welcome everyone who's coming into the Amherst Hazard Mitigation Plan meeting. We're just letting people into the Zoom room right now, so we'll actually get started in about 1 to 2 minutes. Thank you. All right, again, I want to welcome everybody here to the Town of Amherst Hazard Mitigation Plan meeting. My name is Lindsey Stromgren. I'm the fire chief here in Amherst and also the emergency management director for the town. I just want to give you a quick overview of why we're here and what we're doing tonight, and also what we're not doing tonight. The town is involved in its 10-year update of the hazard mitigation plan. That's something we're required to have through FEMA, in particular for being eligible for certain funding for the town. So a plan was done a little over 10 years ago. We're doing the 10-year update now. We have a grant from MEMA, Massachusetts Emergency Management Agency, to do that. Through that grant, we have hired the Pioneer Valley Planning Commission to do the bulk of the work for us and ultimately produce that final report. It's a 2-year-long process. We're in year 2 right now. As part of that process, we need to hold 2 public hearings, both to present to the public what we're doing and to solicit any input or questions. So this is the first of those 2 public meetings. So tonight, we've hired, like I said, Pioneer Valley Planning Commission. Mimi Kaplan from Pioneer Valley Planning is here. She's going to be running the show. She has a presentation to show us, and then there'll be a public comment section after. There ultimately will be a second public hearing, we think, after the first of the year, when we'll be able to present something closer to the final draft for comment from the public. Also joining me here tonight there is a committee together for the hazard mitigation plan updates. It's a pretty large group, like 20 people of stakeholders from the town, the university, the colleges, and other. Here tonight are a few of those members. Steve Gahn is one of our assistant fire chiefs. Kate Doherty is from UMass Environmental Health and Safety and Emergency Management Director for UMass. And Sean Hannon is our IT Director. And Samantha Giffen in the corner there is our Communications Director for the town. We are here tonight exclusively to talk about that Amherst Hazard Mitigation Plan, which deals primarily with natural disasters and what can we do to prevent impacts of those. We can't prevent what the environment does, but we can prevent what it does to us here in the community, what impacts it has, and how we respond to that. So that is what we are here for. What we're not here for, although I am open to discussing it at any point in time, is talking about fire department staffing, a new fire station, or anything like that. That really doesn't have play here tonight. And of course, everybody probably knows we did have a very major fire event in town. Started Friday. We literally just left that fire scene an hour ago at 5 o'clock with our final firefighters. Certainly a big event, a lot to be discussed about that down the road. But again, that's not what we're here for tonight. I'm totally open, either after the meeting or any other time, for questions on anything related to that fire or the fire department. But tonight is very specific to discuss our hazard mitigation plan and its current draft. So with that, we'll turn it over to Mimi and get started. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you, Chief Stromberg. Thanks everyone for coming, who's here in person and also over Zoom. So as Chief Stromberg said, I am Mimi Kaplan. I'm a planner at Pioneer Valley Planning Commission. Been working with the town for about a year, as he said, on updating this plan. Go to the next slide.
Excuse me, I am one of the interpreters. Would you be please so kind to start the interpretation tool so we can start doing the interpreting? Because without the tool, we cannot actually speak because you'll be hearing us the full time. So can any of the hosts please take care of that? Thank you.
Oh, Samantha is working on it.
Thank you so much.
Okay, so the agenda for the meeting tonight is I will provide an overview of hazard mitigation, what it is, what it entails, an overview of the planning process for this plan update, a little bit about hazard risk analysis for Amherst, go into what the mitigation strategies were in the previous plan, and what would be carried over to the update. And then there will be time for public comment and discussion. So if you have questions, just hold off until till the end, till I've finished the presentation, please. So first, I just want to say thank you to the whole committee, which was really too numerous, too many people to list here. But we've had very well-attended meetings. We've had 3 meetings so far, and really appreciate all their time and energy attending the meetings and providing information and feedback. So FEMA, which is the Federal Emergency Management Agency, defines hazard mitigation as any sustained action taken to reduce or eliminate long-term risk to people and property from natural hazards. And some examples of hazard mitigation are things like limiting development in high-risk areas, such as floodplains is the main thing in our area. Retrofitting structures to protect them from hazards like flooding and high winds, drainage and flood control projects, and education and outreach, such as fire safety education. So there is overlap between hazard mitigation and emergency preparedness. So emergency preparedness encompasses things on the right-hand side, such as having evacuation plans in place, emergency shelters ready to go, emergency communications, et cetera. And then hazard mitigation is broader, encompasses things like regulations, planning, zoning, open space preservation, especially land that could absorb floodwaters, education and outreach, as I mentioned before, and infrastructure improvements. So there are a number of benefits of going through this process and updating the hazard mitigation plan. As the chief mentioned, once Amherst has an approved plan, the town is eligible to apply for hazard mitigation funds from FEMA. In the last, I don't know, I think, within the last year anyway, for sure. FEMA did eliminate one of the grant programs, which was BRIC, which was the Building Resilient and Infrastructure, Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities. However, we don't know, that program might come back. And there are also a few other grant programs that are still available for communities to apply for funding from, including the one that gets put in place if there's an emergency declaration. So going through this process also identifies cost-effective actions to reduce risk and also identify other funding sources besides FEMA, such as the MVP program, municipal vulnerability preparedness, and other grant programs. It helps communities prevent future losses and save money on disasters. So FEMA estimates that every dollar spent on mitigation could save $6 on future disaster losses. Makes communities more resilient to natural hazards and the impacts of climate change. Hopefully increases awareness of hazards and risks. And in the case of a serious hazard or disaster, could save lives. The main components of the plan are these 5 here. So we identify and describe the hazards that can affect Amherst, identify and map critical infrastructure. So the map is right there, the hazard mitigation map. And then we also, as a committee, went through and updated a pretty lengthy list in the plan itself. Risk assessment, so assessing how these natural hazards can impact buildings, property, and residents, especially vulnerable populations. Assessing the town's mitigation capabilities, so that means looking at capabilities such as administrative, financial, outreach, those kinds of things. And then seeing where are there gaps and what could be improved. And then reviewing the previous mitigation strategies, assessing what's been done, what needs to still be done, what would we need to carry over to the new plan, maybe needs to be revised, and then identifying new mitigation strategies. So this means there'll be 5 committee meetings. This is the first public meeting. I and my coworker will complete the draft plan. Once the draft plan's complete, we'll have a second public meeting and the draft plan will be available for public review. And then we incorporate any comments, submit the final plan to MEMA. They might request a few revisions. We make those. Then the plan goes to FEMA, same process. And then once FEMA approves the plan, the town council adopts it. And then the plan is good for 5 years. So even though we're updating it after 10, technically it's not. After 5 years, you have to update again in order to be eligible for the funding. So this is the natural hazard risk analysis process that the committee went through and looked at all of the hazards listed in the left-hand column and updated all of these. So basically, yeah, like updated the assessment, looking at how big of an area would this hazard likely affect, small, medium, large, and what's the probability of it occurring? And we're really looking at a short time frame. So saying like, what's the probability of occurring in the next year or a couple years? We're not looking out long term based on the data as well as how often it's been occurring in the past and projections based on climate change. And that could be from very low, which is like under 1%, up to very high, which is 70 to 100% chance. And then assessing what the potential impact could be from minor, which would be just maybe small amounts of property damage, up to catastrophic, which could mean, multiple injuries or death and a lot of property damage. And then based on all that, the committee assigned each hazard a number from 1 being the highest risk down to 5 being the lowest risk. And the committee felt for Amherst that extreme temperatures and localized flooding were the highest risk. Flooding, so 100-year flooding, which is more looking at like riverine flooding, thunderstorms, wind microbursts, wildfire and brush fire were the next highest, so number 2. Severe snowstorm and ice storms, hurricanes, and drought were medium risk. Well, drought 3 to 4. Tornadoes, low risk. Earthquake, low risk, and dam failure, lowest risk. So climate change is affecting all of the hazards that we just looked at on the previous slide, other than earthquakes, as far as we know. So both the frequency and severity of these hazards. And so these are some projections from the 2022 Massachusetts Climate Change Assessment Report, just showing a few projections of climate change. The top one is the change in the number of days per year over 90 degrees compared to the baseline. And this is showing that red circle is showing that inland, this is for inland communities, there could be up to almost 60 days more per year by the end of the century of days over 90 degrees. Of course, these are just projections. We don't know for sure, but just to give a sense of how things will be changing over the long term. And then the bottom projections are showing near-term, mid-century, mid to late century, and end of century, just some examples. By 2030, summer temperatures could increase 3.6 degrees Fahrenheit from the historical period. Mid-century, the 1% annual chance of river flood could be 3 times more likely to occur. By mid to late century, there could be 65 fewer days below freezing, which can have impacts on vector-borne diseases, invasive pests, and also some infrastructure like impacts as well, like freeze thaw, those kinds of things. And then toward the end of the century, the historical 10% annual chance of a daily rainfall event of 2.6 to 4 inches could occur 4 times more frequently. And we've been seeing a lot of these very intense short duration rainfall events, and so that we could see that happening sooner than the end of the century. So the committee, we discussed some of the top hazard concerns in Amherst, in addition to updating that table in the previous slide, looking at some specifics. So some of the top hazard concerns that came up were flooding in floodplains as well as localized flooding in a number of locations, including those that you see here, which I don't think I'll read through all of them. You can see them. And some of these might have to do with undersized culverts, and drainage issues. Some of them it's just from this increase in really large amounts of precipitation and not being able to handle it in a way that we used to be able to. We just need better infrastructure for it now. So in addition to flooding, power outages and safety and cost issues from severe snow and ice storms, particularly seeing more ice and less snow, and also more mixed precipitation storms. Increasing frequency and severity of droughts, resulting in increased risk of wildfire, as well as potential impacts to drinking water supplies and agriculture. And then impacts of extreme temperature on vulnerable populations in particular. So I would say probably primarily high temperatures, but also could be low temperatures, especially if it's a situation where there's power outages and people don't have heat. So, those are not the only hazard concerns. Those were some of the ones that kind of came to the top as priorities. So this is the table of mitigation strategies from the 2016 plan. So for every action, the committee also listed like who is responsible, what's the priority, very generally cost and funding sources and timeframes. So a high priority action was to identify potential land acquisition, especially in areas subject to flooding. One that I know has happened since the last plan was Hickory Ridge Golf Course was purchased. And I think that's like an ongoing one, like that will be carried over to the new plan as other land acquisition will be looked at. Revising the site plan review criteria to incorporate green infrastructure and other stormwater practices. Again, I believe that's in process. It hasn't been completely done. So probably carried over. Similar one is the next one, linking flood hazard mitigation with the EPA MS4 stormwater permit and identifying beneficial areas for green infrastructure. And in case anyone doesn't know that term, you probably do, but it's areas where you can be taking away impervious pavements, impervious surfaces and pavement, and putting in areas that have plantings and soil and plantings that can absorb rainwater, stormwater, and floodwaters. So the next one was conducting outreach to populations that could be unfamiliar with winter weather hazards, particularly some cold weather like frozen pipes or ventilation, and by partnering with schools. And doing it in multiple languages. And so I'm thinking we will be carrying this one over. Some of that has been done. I don't think it's been done with the schools, but someone could correct me if I'm wrong. Identifying vulnerability to cellular infrastructure in town and identifying alternative methods of mass communication in the event of natural hazard emergencies. And reviewing existing town evacuation plans to identify vulnerabilities to natural hazards and develop alternative plans for different types of natural hazard scenarios. So again, I think that one needs to be carried over as well. So that was it those were all the strategies from the previous plan. And like I said, the next step for the committee will be evaluating where they're at with these and then identifying new strategies to incorporate. And that's part of the purpose of having these public meetings is to hear your concerns about hazards, but also if there's areas, things that you think the town could or should be doing for hazard mitigation. This is why we do these meetings, to give us suggestions. So with that, we'll transition to the public comment period. So this is time to talk about any concerns you have about natural hazards or climate change impacts in Amherst, questions about the plan or the process or any other questions or comments related to those topics. And I don't know exactly how we're doing it with the people who are online. I'm not sure where Sam went. Oh, it wasn't working? Oh, okay. So I did bring a large, so I could stand up there and take notes, or I could just sit here and write notes. It's hard to know what's best because there might be more comments or questions from the people online. I mean, I guess, yeah, could we just start with people who are in the room?
Sure, so with the council, typically they alternate between them, but let me just see.
Hold on one second.
We just have people raise their hand. And but yeah, there's anybody remotely who would like to comment, if they could raise their hands.
Looks like there's also 2 comments in the chat, but I don't know what those are. They might be related to the translation.
I have
Oh,
a question.
You want to just pass around the microphone? Does that make sense?
Whatever works.
Hey, I'm flexible.
They had a question.
Well, someone here had a question.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I was trying to, we kept looking at you. All right, well, we'll start there. We'll start with the person
Okay,
who's
simple
who's
question.
in person here. Yes, go ahead.
In your time frame, in terms of climate change and the hazards you expect to develop, it seems that they're happening more quickly, and scientists are recognizing the faster changes. Are you integrating those new dates and timeframes in your plan?
I mean, we're using the most recent data and projections. Yeah.
Yeah, because it seems like it's just building faster than anyone anticipated. And I think about days when we might get 48 inches of rain. How do we deal with that?
Yeah, no, you've got to plan ahead and be prepared. Right. And you think, oh, that couldn't happen. But, you know, we see situations where, you know, you have a tropical storm that just falls, like
Yeah.
happened in North Carolina, and drops so much rain, or, you know, we could have flooding more similar to what they've had in Vermont. Yeah.
And my other question is how to engage the population more, because on my street, for example, all the storm drains are covered with leaves and overgrowth. And that's something that a homeowner could just walk out and take care of in 5 minutes or 10 minutes. So I wondered if there could be some kind of, you know, to reach out to homeowners and say, just like every month, check your drain, you know?
Yeah, that's a good point. And that's actually a really good suggestion. All right, so the person, Robin,
Hi, I have a couple of comments or questions. First of all, I completely agree with the previous person around ongoing communication. I think that's something that could easily be done through either text or messaging or posters or, you know, there's lots of opportunities for educating the community in advance of some crisis, because I think what happens is that people are not thinking straight when something's actually happening. And if we are not educating the community along the way, then we're much more likely to end up with some tragedies and people being very confused about what they're supposed to do. I know that sometimes when you hear some kind of a sound, you know, either coming from UMass over their speaker system or the town, and people are like, am I supposed to go in my basement now? Am I supposed to get in my car? Am I supposed to leave? What am I supposed to do? I don't know what it means. So I think that there's lots of ways in which we can continuously educate the community, and I think that's just all of our responsibility to take on in some manner, and happy to help with that as a journalist and as a publisher of that kind of communication myself. The second thing is that I've been living in North Amherst for over 40, 50 years, and I've been tracking the wind. And I'm seeing that I also ended up downloading like 40 years of weather data that finally, when ChatGPT came around, I was able to actually look at and understand what it meant. And just what I was realizing just by living here, seeing the increase in wind. I live across the street from the Cherry Hill Golf Course on a large farm. And so the wind comes up a lot and very frequently. And I'm seeing the impact on the properties, the large open land in the area, and on the trees. And one of the things I've also been seeing is that the permit for managed burns and for burn piles is sort of changed over the years. We used to be able to do 3-4 burns a year on the property, and now it's down to like 2, which is for an 85-acre piece of property problematic, especially when we have drought or a lot of high winds. There's less opportunity to sort of have managed smaller burns. So what I'm wondering is how aligned is this mitigation plan with things like permitting, around responsibilities of large landowners to be able to maintain their properties in a way to sort of mitigate the likelihood of a serious burn issue if we have drought and high winds and a fire. I also am seeing that a lot of the farmland, including the property that I'm living on here, has now solar. So when these kinds of things happen, it impacts infrastructure and things like it impacts more than just the land or the homes or the barns. It's actually going to be impacting things like solar. So I'm also wondering what are the responsibilities of some of the large companies that now have their solar fields on in the way of potential issues like fire or flood. And I think I'll leave it there.
okay, thank you. You don't want to yeah, go.
I had two questions. One is, it seems like some of these hazards interface with people in town trees, which are just part of everybody's life. And I'm wondering if it might make sense, or if you have brought in like the town tree warden to contribute, because it seems like there are various practices and things around how trees are managed that might be relevant. And then my second question was about communication when there's cell towers go down. Because I remember in 9/11, nobody could talk to anybody. And now we've gotten even more dependent, you know, there are fewer people have landlines. And if, I'm just wondering, it seems like a very present issue. And I'm just, you know, if we put it off for a few years, it seems like we're kind of vulnerable. Or maybe there's some method of communicating I'm not aware of, but it's up to asking.
Is that something someone from the town wants to address?
Do you want us to respond today, or is just for public comment?
Oh, no, I mean, you can respond.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, you can use the mic.
Warming up. There we go. I'll just jump back a second to the previous speaker since we are offering some comments. Definitely appreciate the comments about the concern about open burning, especially as it applies to agriculture. It's definitely something that's going to need to be looked at, and it's kind of a two-sided issue. You know, on the one hand, as we've had a couple of bad fire seasons here in the fall, as compared to previous years with drought and other changing conditions, that's going to be an ongoing concern. We follow the state permitting process and will continue to do that. But we also have on the local level the ability to make that more strict, and restrict how many times or where people can burn. So that's something we'll definitely look at, and some of that might be able to be incorporated into this plan. You know, wildfire 10 years ago, we wouldn't have thought was an issue around here. Certainly not the same as it is in the West, but still it is a growing concern, brush fires. So that is a comment we'll definitely consider incorporating a part of the plan. As far as the emergency communications, I think we did have a section on cellular infrastructure, if I'm not mistaken, and that is a huge issue, honestly. It is part of the mitigation, again, not in terms of preventing an issue from occurring in terms of a natural disaster, but in terms of the resiliency of our communication system. So that comes down to both protecting the cellular communications network so we can get messages out to people, phone calls, texts, et cetera. But also you mentioned alternative messaging. That's a tough one, to be honest. And that's, we're talking more about the mitigation here and protecting, but that in terms of response, that definitely is something we are looking at.
Other questions? Oh, there's a couple online. Let's see. Anna?
Hi, my name's Anna Devlin Gothier. I am technically a town councilor for the town of Amherst, but I'm just speaking tonight as an individual. I want to first start off, we're not able to see online which staff are in the room, which town staff are in the room. I do know I heard the fire chief, and so I just want to start off by taking a quick moment to thank all of our staff who have put our existing emergency response protocols into play this weekend, and appreciate them for a moment. And the timing of this meeting is apt, I suppose. A couple quick comments here. First, I am perpetually obsessed with the Adopt a Drain programs that exist in other cities in the US and exist in Massachusetts as well. They're really wonderful programs. I am imagining that this is something that would take more staffing, I'm gonna guess, than we currently have to run, but I do wish we had the capacity to utilize it where folks could claim responsibility for keeping a storm drain clear in their neighborhood. This could absolutely be done on a more informal level, of course, but I really have appreciated the programs. For example, I think San Francisco has a resoundingly used one. I don't know if that's a phrase. Okay. And I wanted to ask one of my other questions was about our radio infrastructure. One of the previous commenters talked about communications, and radios were mentioned in the sense of agency to agency communication. I know that we've been moving radios over to a newer system to have better communication means, but it is something that gets brought up in every budget period because it is a large expenditure. And I'm wondering if I'm again, I don't know which staff are in the room, but I'm going to say one of the chiefs could speak to the switchover of radios and why that is happening and why that is important. I'm going to keep going if that's okay. One of the things that we hear often from residents are first compliments to Sam, specifically for the increase and improvement of our social media communications. But for some of our residents, they're not utilizing social media, and they were asking for a way to get those messages out that are non-emergency messages via email, or email is the mode that gets mentioned most often. But if there were a way for that, for folks to be able to sign up for a non-emergency notification email distribution list, that was something that gets brought up a lot when we think about mitigation and things that individuals can do. And then last but not least, I'm curious if the Planning Commission is doing any advocacy at the state level for continued funding for climate resilience projects. For example, we hear a lot about the prohibitive cost of putting our power lines underground, but we know that it would lessen the risk in these intense storms that are getting more intense due to climate change, of lines falling and causing further harm. So I'd love to hear kind of if there's any work happening to try to mitigate that that challenge for communities like Amherst. And thank you so much. And I appreciate everyone being here. Even though I can't see you, I do appreciate you being here.
Thank you, Anna.
Yeah, this is Chief Strongman again. But, just for everybody's benefit, again, we do have the town manager, Paul Bockelman, in the room, Sam Giffen, our communications director, assistant chief, gone from the fire department, Kate Doherty, the emergency management director from UMass, and Sean Hannon, our our IT director, IT department. And again, I'm Chief Strongman from the fire department. So going to the question about the radio system, it does tie somewhat into the previous question from the person in the room about the cellular network. So police and fire, we do have a public safety radio system. We are continually trying to upgrade that. We're in year 2 of a major upgrade right now, which is replacing all of the equipment for both police and fire. That's both the infrastructure, base stations, and the vehicle radios. We have multiple sites. Without getting too technical, we do have multiple sites. Those sites do have generators. So there's a certain level of redundancy built in. We do have to look at how we get that information back to our stations. We have a combination of, it was Verizon telephone lines. Those are actually being discontinued by Verizon. We actually just got a notice in the last couple of weeks that they're discontinuing those lines in May of 26 for public safety and other people. They're a special kind of line. We knew that was coming, but that is now, we actually have a date and a piece of paper that's saying it's happening. So we will no longer be able to depend on the phone company for interconnecting our radio system. Fortunately, the town of Amherst is engaged, and Sean might be able to speak to it, with an extremely robust fiber upgrade for the town, so that we're no longer relying on somebody else's fiber that we rent. The town has developed its own fiber network for town buildings, and we are putting our radio system largely, but not exclusively, on that fiber network. That gives us a lot of day-to-day advantages and redundancy, but fiber and phone lines and power lines are all subject to different kinds of disasters. So we have to be conscientious of that. So we do have other things in place, such as a microwave link from one site back. We're about to put a second one in. So all this is to say there's a lot of redundancy built in and multiple pathways for the radio system. And separate from that, we have started utilizing what's called FirstNet in the last few years. If anybody's familiar with that, that is a public safety cellular network that is exclusively for police, fire, EMS, DPW, things like that. We've been using that more and more for our day-to-day operations. It's also available for emergency operations. It has some advantages as well. It gives us a second means of communication. But back to the previous speaker, it also is dependent on a cellular network and cellular equipment. So we would never want to rely solely on that. So we have a number of different plans in place for certain things failing. And we ultimately have what we call our island concept, which is everything around us goes down. We have some capacity to still work with our public safety radios just out of one of our stations. Limits range, but as long as we're there and we have power there, we'll still be on the air. And then, of course, the cellular network, as we discussed earlier, and public notification is a different subject and something that our IT department has been working on.
Thanks so much. I appreciate it.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. I have some concerns that are they're sort of related, and they're related to rising groundwater and increased rainfall events in the future. David Boat from the University of Massachusetts has published Mass GIS maps online that help us start to parse this out. But there are different parts of town that are more susceptible to groundwater flooding, and that's something that will potentially be worse as we have those warmer winters. So usually when the ground freezes, it pushes the groundwater down. And then also any surface water that doesn't run off and goes in the ground also becomes groundwater. So we do have parts of town that are more vulnerable to groundwater flooding than others. We may not see that today, but a foot or two rise in groundwater may start to have quite visible impacts in some parts of our town. And our town, not everyone in town is on municipal sewer. So when groundwater rises, that can cause septic systems to fail. That can also cause nutrient loading of our resource areas. So that's another, on an individual property owner level, could be really impactful, but also on a wider scale. I have observed in town drainage ditches. I used to run a lot. I don't so much anymore, but I noticed over the years of running through town that some of the ditches adjacent to sidewalks were growing in. So over a 5-year period, a ditch that was maybe 3 feet deep is now 6 inches deep. And I know we're very understaffed, and I feel bad even saying anything about this, but if we could have more resources to help increase, return the capacity of our drainage ditches to manage stormwater in these events, and that'll help, again, keep our roads and our streets safe. And then thirdly, I think it might, if we could get funding for townwide assessment of stormwater infrastructure. So the pipes that are in the ground now that may have been built in the 60s or the 90s or to the 2000s, to see what capacity they can hold and what level rain event. I know the state DEP gives the concession to the town, to all towns in the Commonwealth, that if we're rebuilding an existing roadway, we only have to consider up to a 1-inch storm event. That means, when we have that 3-inch storm, that 4-inch storm, that 7-inch storm, the systems we have today are seriously under capacity. So it'd be good to know what those gaps are and how we can start chipping away at that to be more resilient for what we know is coming.
Thank you. And I will look into adding that groundwater data to the map. So thank you. Yeah.
So I want to talk just briefly first about communication to the public and reaching out to as many people as possible. This is only one of a multifaceted approach, I know, but keep in mind that the town is divided into 5 political districts, and each district is served by 2 councilors, and each councilor in those districts is required to have at least 2 public meetings every year. I try to have more than 2. I'm open to having as many as I can, given time and energy, but that's a way in which the public can be reached. And so for me, for instance, in the coming year, this would be certainly something that I would like to put on a district meeting, and I'm sure others would be too. So over the coming year or two, whatever, keep in mind that that is a vehicle that already exists and can be used to reach the public. I wanted to go I'm looking at the screen here, and you've given us I think a really good sense of the hazards we face and the climate change impacts. But as far as being able to comment about the plan, as I understand it right now, we actually don't have a plan. What we have is a plan from, I guess, was it 10 years ago or whenever it was? And we saw that some things have been implemented or are being implemented and some are not being implemented yet. And so I guess the question is, when would we, sort of process question, when would we actually see a plan that we could actually comment on? I suppose we could comment on the older plan, but that's the first question, is when would we actually have something to look at that we could actually comment on? And then once a plan is created, who actually, we could use the past experience, I guess, who actually oversees and makes sure that these things happen? Is that something that, who does that fall to?
Yeah, those are good questions. So the draft plan should be finished kind of probably late winter, early spring. I don't have an exact date, but when the draft plan's finished, it will be available for public comment. It'll be posted on the website. There will be links that will be advertised, and you'll be able to review it. And you could either email me comments or email someone on the committee comments. I don't think you'd, I mean, obviously you could print out the plan and write comments and get it in that way. But yeah, and then we will also have a second public meeting once the draft plan's complete, that you could also make comments about the plan. And your second question, oh my gosh, I've just forgotten it. Sorry.
Well, I mean, once a plan,
Oh, Yeah, so that's,
I think I know the answer, but I just want to.
yeah, I mean, ideally you have, an implementation committee, but I guess that's a question for you of how you'll handle that.
Yeah. Yeah, in terms of the implementation, one of the charts we saw earlier did note sort of which department or agencies each particular hazard plan fell under. A lot of this falls to the DPW. In fact, probably 3/4 of what we're discussing falls under DPW. And then there's some that fall under other agencies like fire. So that's the starting point. Those are the agencies that need to implement those pieces of the plan. And then, yes, our main committee that's working right now, the Hazard Mitigation Committee, it's a good comment, should plan on an implementation strategy and who would oversee that, just to make sure each department is following through as much as possible. Keep in mind, a lot of these things obviously have financial implications. We can't sit here today and guarantee that everything that's in that plan is going to happen in the next 5 years. If you look at the plan made 10 years ago, some of those have been completed, many are underway, and some have not been done. So this is a plan for the town to move forward, but with that has to come funding for different initiatives, which will be brought forth in the normal budget process by each department responsible for it. But as mentioned earlier, having this very plan in place updated opens the town for grants, many of which, again, fall under the DPW and conservation, to apply for the grant funding specifically to implement some of these initiatives.
All right. Lenore has her hand up on Zoom, so I'll call on her next. And just a reminder to identify yourself if you're asking a question. Lenore, did you want to unmute yourself? If you're muted, you're not muted. You want to ask your question?
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah. Hi, thank you. Not so much a question, but well, first I just want to thank the committee members for your efforts, and big thanks to our firefighters, especially in light of the recent event. I just wanted to bring up some fundamental points to consider as you make specific plans. As encouraging as it is to see some foresight and you trying to see the bigger picture, it's not always built into the organizational framework and daily operations of most governments, including our own. For instance, seeing the relationship between what we build and develop and what we preserve and protect. Like if we use water and soil as two lenses that help us see that relationship more clearly, if we overdevelop on irreplaceable land like forests and wetlands, then we sabotage the climate regulating potential of those intact ecosystems. I don't mean to preach to the choir, but I think all this bears repeating. Flood and drought mitigation requires healthy soil structure and microbiology to provide water retention, filtration, purification, stream protection. Soil health and biodiversity on our farms ensures nutritious, ample food amidst the climate chaos that is impacting and going to continue to impact food security and increase disease. The forests, wetlands, and wildlands regulate regional water cycles, which a lot of people are not aware of, that they actually create rainfall through transpiration and photosynthesis, which also regulates carbon cycle. And that's not just limited to sequestration. And increasingly, studies on brain health provide us evidence for the essential necessity of wilder contiguous habitat. And if, where, and how we build new structures, as evidenced unfortunately by the terrible fires at Olympia Place, it requires careful consideration by all our boards of all the possible factors that include our water supply and infrastructure. And I know that our town holds a lot of anxiety over conflicting interests. We have this financial situation of a small town with a small budget and tax base, yet with sort of a big university and expenses, kind of like a larger city. But we have human resources. We have the brains and hearts of our people and natural resources that are invaluable. So I feel if we use those human resources wisely, that's when we're honoring our natural resources and our very fundamental need for clean water, air, and food. And I know this is stuff that everybody talks about, but actually making this happen in our policies, in our regulations, in our decisions, in our permitting is another story. So I'm hoping that we'll be creative and bold and think more holistically than the status quo, since we really are in unprecedented times. Thank you very much for all that all of you do.
Thank you, Lenore. Yeah, go ahead. Can you say your name though? No, we're gonna go back. We're just going back and forth.
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. I look forward to the next step in the process. I would say that I think one thing that seems to be below the surface from the slide about the previous plan and what was accomplished or not accomplished, but if you look back in the time frame where it was anticipated that a lot of these things were going to be adopted, it's somewhere between 1 and 5 years, and that was in 2016. We're 10 years out, and a number of those things, whereas they may have been aspirational or anticipated that they were achievable, it sounds like many of those weren't realized. So I guess
Or partially realized.
it would be interesting when we get to the planning part to see what the barriers were, and just to avoid that we're the situation where we would be reproducing those again, right? And then the other thing I would say is that mitigation is one part of the emergency planning process, and you talked a little bit about preparedness and then response and recovery. But I would say that oftentimes when we think about hazard mitigation or disaster planning or whatnot, we do it for that big incident that's coming down the road. And the one common thread in all of these, I think that we need to recognize, is the way to reduce the potential impact of a disaster, natural disaster, man-made, is to make sure that we are appropriately funding and planning and giving our community the resources for public safety in the day-to-day steady state, so that the threshold to fund or respond to something is not so high that we're doing something completely different in times of disaster than we do day-to-day. And that means staffing our fire departments, having appropriate response capabilities, apparatus, so that we're not doing something different as part of this plan than we would do on the everyday basis. So I thank you for the opportunity to comment.
Thank you. So we'll go to Susan. Oh, sorry. Did someone want to comment? Oh, okay. I'll go to Susan. You have your hand up.
Yes, I'm Susan Farber and I live in North Amherst. I recognize that the plan at this point is the big picture of Amherst, looking very generally. And I'm wondering whether the town has or will have the capability to help neighborhoods and landowners. I'm thinking about our neighborhood that is concerned about localized flooding. And might there be some assistance for someone with the know-how to walk through our neighborhood to identify specific areas of risk, help us design some solutions such as digging a swale to divert some rainwater? I'm thinking also that owners of larger tracts of forest land might have a similar need to look at their land in terms of mitigating fire risk. Thank you.
Thank you. I cannot answer that question. I don't know if there's anyone in the room who can.
No, I don't think we have an answer to it. I think it's another thing to take under advisement, which is why we're here. Not knowing the full process of what the DPW can do, anything like what was just described really falls under their area. I'm sure they are looking at small individual neighborhoods, certainly one of the first slides we had identified very specific areas that are known to be flood problems. Some of the larger ones, I'm sure that would look at the smaller ones also. So we'll make a note of that.
All right. Another person online, Jacinta.
Hi, everyone. I don't know, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. My name is Jacinta Williams. I'm one of the planners for the town of Amherst. And I'm actually really appreciating the conversation, and I'm just kind of going to throw out a couple of maybe questions or suggestions, and just to marinate on it as you guys continue to work on the plan. I'm hearing a lot about, working on the plan as far as mitigating the disasters or potential situations, but I'm just wondering if there's anything in the plan or will be anything in the plan for just how the community is addressed in terms of like if parts of Amherst are cut off from one another. And in terms of educating the community, will there be an ongoing hazard mitigation committee, not just for the plan itself, but I don't know if that's something the town councilors will take on in order to educate the community. Another thing that I've written down was like designated shelters. I don't know if you're planning on creating some sort of map for where there might be places where people can congregate in different parts of Amherst, just in case, fire or DPW can't get to them immediately. Another thing that I have written down is community training and first aid. I don't know if the fire department wants to do something. Maybe it happens at the next sustainability festival, or there's some other kind of avenue for community engagement where this conversation is ongoing and we start to identify vulnerable populations or places in Amherst that are more likely to be less self-reliant or resilient in the face of a hazard or a disaster. So those are just some of the notes that I had as I was listening. Happy to connect offline if you need to reach me. Thank you.
Thanks, Jacinta.
So just a quick follow-up to that, that again is good information, that we'll consider. As was mentioned earlier, there's sort of a fine line, gray line between what this plan does for the high level, looking at the town of mitigation, and then actually emergency preparedness. And emergency preparedness is wide open in terms of what we think we should do and we could start working on, part of, but separate also from this plan. So things like sheltering and communications out of, what you should do in the case of a certain scenario are discussions I've had with the town manager and many others in town. We are looking at updating our emergency operations center plan. We are looking at updating our sheltering plan. And part of all that, again, is back to the communications. So some of that is touched on in this hazard mitigation plan, but FEMA sort of has a very fine template, if you will, of what goes into this plan, which is what we're following. But separate, but connected to that could be our discussions about emergency preparedness. And we're certainly very, very interested in pursuing that over the next year, even beyond, when this plan is completed.
Yeah, and actually that did come up in I think our last committee meeting, and we talked about ways that maybe the community can maybe organize at neighborhood levels or in the district levels in terms of communication, as well as maybe groups, or I don't know what's already in place in terms of maybe neighborhood listservs or ways that people can check on each other, or neighborhood education, or other ways that you could improve community resilience. But it was something we started to talk about, and I think we should probably come up with maybe a mitigation strategy that would incorporate something like that. Any other questions?
I just wondered
Oh.
if you could put a couple of the drafts in the library so we could read them.
Sure.
Thanks.
Yeah.
And I believe, although don't hold me to it, I think it is available on our website, the previous current version. If not, we'll certainly put it up there. So if you want it, it's, you know, it's a public document. We certainly welcome people reading through the current version. And that's the one we're currently revising. So that would be worth looking at. We'll make sure that is on the website if it's not already.
I guess if there's no other questions or comments, then we will wrap things up. So thank you, everybody, members of the committee, members of the public who attended, and you will hear more soon. And people who are here in person, please take more food. Okay. Have a good night.